Welcome to this very special edition of the Home Impodcast. Today we are joined by executive producer, writer, and co-creator of Home Improvement, a man who was nominated for 6 Primetime Emmys and was the recipient of the Michael Landon Award in 1993, an author, an actor, a scribe for men of the likes of Steve Martin and Johnny Cash. Today we're talking to Carmen Finestra. Welcome, Carmen.
Well, thank you. I'm happy to join you. I'm not sure what the Michael Landon Award is.
That's good.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Adam.
You were right about everything else, but what's that?
It was listed on a Wikipedia page. So
wow.
It must not have left a major impact on you. I take it it's not on your mantle.
I have never received the Michael Landon Award, but it could be on Wikipedia Award. All right. It could be on the page, but sorry, everything else was correct.
Maybe they just gave it to you but didn't tell you. That's a strange move.
Yeah, I never even worked on Home Improvement. I'm not sure how that was on there either. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, absolutely. Again.
Well, I know by listening to your podcast that you do research and you have to go to any source you can find. So
yeah, great. We
take any and all sources.
I'm not even sure what the Michael Landon Award is. That's interesting. Okay. Sorry to keep.
Sorry to interrupt. You won it in 1993. You were the recipient. So something happened in 1993. I don't know. But Jordan's going to start us off with a question here. Go ahead, Jordan.
Yeah. So we want to start the podcast off. We want to see, how you started your career, not even necessarily in home improvement, but in just in Hollywood in general. So we're just interested in how you broke into the field as a producer and what that looks like for you.
Well, like anyone who gets started in the business, I began as a production assistant or a gopher for a producer named Joe Cates in New York City, who was actually Phoebe Cates' father. You know Phoebe Cates? She was in Fast Times at Ridgemont High.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Well, her dad, I knew Phoebe when she was 11, but began as a gopher for him. I used to write funny memos in the office. And then he said, write something I can use. And in 1976, he was doing a 4-show series with Johnny Cash in Nashville. And I wrote some banter for Johnny and June, and he loved it. And he hired me. And one of the guys on that show, who was just beginning to really take off, was Steve Martin. So he and I wrote some stuff on the show and got along well. And that later led to me doing things for him. And so I began, because I was a gopher and I had met a lot of writers and who had worked for Joe, I began to get interviews and worked on various shows. And eventually, your credits, you may start as a story editor or then move up to an executive story editor and started to get producer credits. And fortunately, I was working on a show called Punky Brewster as a consultant, which a lot of girls at that time in the early 80s would know really loved that show. And a former roommate of mine, Elliot Schoenman, became the head writer of Cosby. And I was hired for a brief stint on Cosby. It all worked well, apparently. And then I was brought back year after year. And as a result, my credit increased from producer to supervising producer. And then another person I met on that show was Matt Williams. Then Matt and I and David eventually helped create Home Improvement.
Yeah, that was actually our next question. Yeah, I wanted to ask, how did you meet Matt and David, who for our listeners?
Well, Matt was, like I said, on the Cosby Show, and Matt and David went to college together at Evansville University. And while we were doing Cosby, Matt and David had started a writers' conference in New Harmony, Indiana, which is near Evansville, and I began to go to that writers' conference, and that's where I met David. So the three of us seemed to hit it off very well, and eventually when Matt got his development deal at Disney to create after Roseanne, when he created that, and that was a mess to begin with, but he went to Disney, took David with him, and I was doing Cosby at the time and knew that, after the 6th season, I think it was time to move on. I called Matt and said, how would you the three of us, how would you feel about the three of us creating a show? And he said, we would love that. At the time, they were doing an anthology show with Carol Burnett. And so I came in, was a consultant on that show, and we spent a year writing the pilot of Home Improvement.
So, you guys got together and you kind of decided to write this pilot. How did you guys first become familiar with Tim Allen and kind of what he was doing on the stand-up stage and his persona?
Well, here's the interesting thing. We didn't know anything about Tim Allen. We were out at the Disney studio, and we were trying to create a show about a dad. Mm-hmm. And Tim had signed a deal with Disney. Now, the interesting thing is, Disney did not bring Tim to us first. They brought Tim to another producer, whose name shall remain anonymous. He had already done a couple of shows. He saw what Tim did, and he said, I don't see that Tool thing. I see you traveling around the country in a motorhome with your family. That's the show. Tim said, I don't think that's what I want. Then they took him to another producer who had written on some very smart shows and was on a development deal at Disney, and he and Tim just did not hit it off at all. Then the third group he brought Tim to was us, and we got it right away. I mean, Tim was from Michigan, Matt was from Indiana, David was from Illinois, I was from Central PA, which is very Midwestern.
Yeah.
All our fathers had worked with their hands. You'd be amazed that, maybe you wouldn't, not a lot of Hollywood writers have fathers who worked with their hands. They were usually in white-collar jobs.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so they brought Tim to us. We began to see what Tim was all about. I don't know if you guys ever saw that Showtime special he did called Men Are Pigs?
Yeah, clips and pieces.
We saw that. Then we went and saw him at a theater in L.A., which seated about 2,000. And that's kind of where he was at the time. He was just beginning to build his audience. And we loved it. I mean, we loved it. We got it right away, what he was trying to do. We hit it off as far as the kind of comedy we wanted to do. And it just came together very well. I mean, Matt actually had the first meeting with Tim. He came back from that lunch and said, this is going to be a top 10 show. And then we all met him, and we got it. We knew what he wanted. Now, Tim, as a comedian, was worried that, this was his shot. If this didn't work, he was probably not going to be able to do this kind of a show again. And he said to us, whereas you guys will just go on and keep on doing what you're doing. Now, that was not incorrect, and we used to kind of have fun with him about that. So
it's
anyway, that's how it all started.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear how, Tim was kind of brought to these other producers and it didn't work out, and then finally he gets to you guys. And
well, another thing, as you may have heard, is Disney also, first of all, said they wanted him to do a version of Turner and Hooch. I don't know if you ever saw that movie. Tom Hanks and the dog. Yeah, they wanted a sitcom about that. Then they wanted to put him in Dead Poets Society, a sitcom about that. And Tim always held fast. He knew he wanted to be a Tool guy and he wanted to have a family. I mean, that much he knew. So, yeah, it's amazing how, but he just, as sometimes if comedians are too hungry, they'll just go with whatever somebody tells them and they end up in a bad situation. But Tim understood that what he was doing was becoming recognized. He knew the character he would be, and we got it all the way.
Very interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting to have the foresight and kind of know where know yourself.
Yeah, and not be, jumping at the first opportunity just because it's an opportunity. It's got to be the right opportunity.
Oh, yeah. See, Tim had been out on the road a long time, and he found that reaction to the Tool stuff just as an aside. One night he started talking about Tools, and people really went crazy, so he began to hone that. So he kind of knew what could work for him.
Now, in terms of, we kind of talked about the inception of the show. This is kind of, we'll make this sort of a two-parter. I guess first I'm wondering, how involved were you in casting or the casting process?
We were involved 100% right from the start.
Okay. Interesting.
Once the pilot was, here's the funny thing. We went with Tim to the, we pitched the show. I mean, they already knew us. Sort of. I mean, certainly knew Matt. They certainly knew I'd worked on The Cosby Show. So we went in with the network with Tim. I mean, and they had seen the act, and they had seen him perform at the Wiltern Theater as we did. So they knew what they had. So what we did, actually, Matt was very smart. He said, we are not going to hand in the script until 4 days before the pilot is to be shot. Because and it was so set that we were going to have a pilot. Now, we had sample scenes that we used for auditions. And the interesting thing is that 3 of the people we were going to cast eventually did not get in the show.
Right.
One of them, of course, I think maybe Rick Karn mentioned that Stephen Tobolowsky was supposed to play his part.
Right, yeah, but he did mention that. Yep.
Yeah, the original character, though, was nothing like Al. His name was Glenn. He was a nervous wreck. Tim always was throwing him off, and he was just a nervous wreck all the time. In fact, then Stephen Tobolowsky was going to make a movie, and then after we had the show going, he was going to come back in as Glenn. But eventually he decided to stick to a movie career. Then we had another guy that we were going to cast as Wilson. He was a younger guy with a kind of wilder hair, deep voice like Earl. And he had come in to audition for this Glenn role. And we said, hey, you might work for this other role called Wilson. You know, you're behind a fence and this and that happens. So we cast him, and a week before we were even supposed to start the pilot, his agent called up and said, what do you mean he's behind a fence? We said, well, that's what we told him. He said, no. He's not going to be behind a fence. I mean, no, you will have shot that pilot before you ever see this guy, and I'm not going to tell you his name. And then, as people probably know, we had cast a different person as Jill. You may know that Frances Fisher was in that role originally. Don't know if you know that. The irony, of course, because I know how much Jordan loves Betsy Randall. Betsy Randall was one of the finalists for this role. That's why she came back later. She and Frances Fisher and a woman named Mary Paige Keller, who probably could have gotten the role of Jill had she accepted it. But she was up for another pilot with Jim Garner. And she was only like one of the 3 finalists. She said, well, for an opportunity to work with Jim Garner, I'm going to have to turn you down. No, little did she know that.
What was the show with Jim Garner, James Garner?
I don't know what it was. I think, I'm not even sure it got off the ground, because the only thing I saw Jim Garner do was whatever that show was. Yeah. I don't even think that show happened. So Mary Paige Keller was a very attractive woman who, she would have been, it wouldn't have been certainly not as good. Right. But the role finally, she wouldn't come into audition, so it was Mary Paige Keller, it was Betsy Randall, I can't even think of the third person, but came in to audition. And ironically, I was always the guy that said, I don't see this. Everybody else did. Because what Frances was doing was, now you don't know, but she did a TV movie about Lucy and Desi, and she mimicked Lucy perfectly. I always felt when she came into audition for the role, she was kind of mimicking, I'm this feisty person. To me, it didn't ring true at all. But fortunately, everybody chose Frances, because if we chose, let's say, Betsy would have probably been in the series. And I have nothing against Betsy, as Jordan apparently does, but you can't compare Betsy to, and she's a great lady, but you can't compare her to Jill.
We love her on Boy Meets World.
Yeah, she ended up getting her own series, so it worked out for her.
Okay, yes it did. No, she had a nice run on that. I'm happy to know that. Now, if you would like a little information on how we ended up not using Frances, I will tell you that.
I'd love to hear it.
Well, Frances was in the show. And 2 days before we were supposed to, I kind of skipped over the script, but anyway, needless to say, we eventually got the script to where we wanted it and how we did it and all that. But Frances was in the show. Now, we had decided that 2 days before we shoot the pilot, we're going to bring in an audience to see the run-through, which after 6 days, would really be up to speed. We would have a camera there to record it so they would know, okay, the cameras will be in here. There's a little, So the audience came in, and right from the they loved Tim. We started at Tool Time. They were howling. We go home. Everything is kind of going great with the boys. We're having a lot of fun. Then we get to the dishwasher. When Tim says the dirty dishes, she says, you can't put that in the dishwasher till you take off the yolk. And he says, wait, I have to wash the dish before I put it in the dishwasher? And when Betsy said when Frances said don't touch the dishwasher, it almost sounded like a plea for help. Like, you brute, you beast, stop it. And the audience became uncomfortable. And the comedy was kind of was stopping there. And then the next scene, she's going off to a job interview, and at the beginning scene she says, now, you're not going to touch that dishwasher. And he says, hey, I'm not a kid. Of course not. Then she leaves. When he went next door to Wilson and said, do you have that compressor? I'm thinking of rewiring the dishwasher. The audience kind of gasped, like, what's the matter with this guy? The poor woman has told him not to do it. So, you could see something is wrong here. But when he began to work on the dishwasher with the boys, the audience was howling again. So they loved him, but this relationship wasn't quite working. And then she came home. She saw the dishwasher. It failed. You just felt badly for her. Somehow Tim, I don't know, it just didn't seem to work. So Frances was let go that day. And the irony is, she was dating Clint Eastwood at the time, and Clint Eastwood and Tim hit it off really well. So Tim was so upset that he wasn't going to be friends with Clint Eastwood anymore. And then I think he began to think they'll get another guy to be the tool guy, but we assured him that was not the case. But so we had an interview with Pat, who was recommended to us by Stu Bloomberg of ABC. And normally you were not always interested in what the network had to say, but we met with her. She was kind of heavy-set. She had just given birth to twins just after birth. The thing that sold her was that her husband at the time, Ray Baker, was in a show called Down Home that was going to be canceled. So she said, well, looks like Ray's not going to be working. So she kind of accepted, I think, thinking this wasn't going to be a long run, because she'd been in 2 sitcoms that had failed after 13 weeks. Now, the reason 2 days later, we brought, that's how quickly she got up to speed. We brought the audience in that was going to be at the pilot, but we knew we weren't going to shoot that. We were going to wait till the following Tuesday to make sure everybody, really knew their roles. Well, when she did the role, when Tim Taylor said, you got to clean off the dish. I'll just power this up and you won't have to worry. When she said, don't touch the dishwasher, the crowd went crazy. They were laughing already. And that woman, when he went next door and said to Wilson, I'm going to rewire the dishwasher, the crowd was roaring. They were just waiting for that woman to come home and see this. So no change in dialogue whatsoever. Now with this new person in the role, it was just taking off like gangbusters.
Yeah, just the attitude change, it sounds like. And
she, this strong woman,
yeah.
She had, I just can't explain how that worked out. And I often do that when I go to a movie. I'll sit there and go, okay, if this isn't working, how would it be if so-and-so was doing that role or so-and-so? And sometimes that's what it's all about. Not always, sometimes you fail as writers, but sometimes when you've got the right person in the role, it really takes off.
And it certainly did. What are some of your favorite fond memories that you look back on those, first 50 episodes and they just stick out for you even to today?
Oh, but let me just say that the night of the pilot, when we finally shot it and the audience was in there, you could, and it just, everything worked. The reason that you have that sort of tag where you have her in the garage and the guy and him pounding on the door outside is those were originally scenes that we were going to end the show with, but we just said we could stop the show right here in the middle of the second act, because what happened is you every time you write something, you leave enough time, let's say 2 minutes less of actual script because that'll be your laugh spread. Well, our laugh spread was like 6-7 minutes. I mean, they were just laughing at everything. And we had to finally edit that down, but the night of that pilot, when it was over, you could feel like a tingling in the air of electricity. You just knew that you had just watched something that was going to be huge. And I can't explain that feeling. I remember David was so overwhelmed, he just kind of pointed toward the stage and said, well, it's up to them now, meaning the actors. I said, up to them? What are you kidding? We got to write 100 more of these, and they got to be just as good, you know. So it was overwhelming. And the network came around like they were walking on eggshells, like, what do we do now not to screw this up? I mean, I cannot tell you how amazing that was. When I was at Cosby Show tapings, they would be so electric, and the audience that was there was so high and up that after every show you kind of had a great feeling. But this was, wow, we did this. This is going to be something, you know, and I just can't explain it. I'd never been involved with anything like that. And I'll tell you one other thing. In the summer, when the audiences came in to see, you know, and they had no idea. Once they saw the pilot, it was as if the show had been on for 3 years. They began to love everything they got the characters, the laughs were there. You know, generally many shows you kind of build up to where you're going to go, but this took off right from the beginning. And anyway, I mean, I think there were many, many moments of the first. I mean, I think we worked very hard, but when you work really hard and you have a good show, it's so rewarding when it works. I mean, I've been on shows that, let us say, were not great, and you work just as hard, but you're fighting just to make it adequate. But in this case, you knew the hard work, the late hours, that chances were that what was going to happen when this was taped was going to be great. Yeah,
so, you know, it is a fantastic pilot. For my money, I think it's one of the better, you know, sitcom pilots.
Wait, this is you, Jordan, talking? Who said that was a fantastic pilot?
Adam.
Okay. Because Jordan, I know you've had a little difficulty after seeing it when you were 7. Something didn't quite connect as much. But, you know, let's remember.
I don't remember.
Time goes by. Right. Time goes by. Comedy changes. You know, I have no problem with that. I mean, I'm just saying the pilot worked so well for us, and it cemented the character so well. And I think the thing that you guys talked about were a couple of those scenes with Mark and at the end of the show that you called endearing. Mm-hmm. And I am highly complimented by that because it wasn't treacly, overly sentimental. I thought it was really hit a perfect note that people could feel good about. And that's not always easy to create.
Yeah, the sentimentality and kind of the endearing nature is, I think I speak for both of us, one of our favorite things about the show, and we both think very highly of the Christopher McDonald episode, For Whom the Bells Toll. I think it's one of my, 3 favorites.
Oh, great. You know what? What's funny about that is Christopher McDonald, he was completely thrown because he was the bad guy. Yeah. And what the heck was his name? The something, what was his name of the show?
Is it Stu? Something?
Well, it was something they calling him the Stooster, something like that.
Oh, yeah. Oh, no. I can't
the funny thing was, the poor guy was not used to being the bad guy. And I was out in the parking lot with him, and he was just kind of indignant. He says, they don't like the Stooster. They don't like the Stooster. I said, but they're not supposed to like them. You know, you're doing great. Poor actor. I guess he thought he was going to be loved.
I don't know. I think, is his name, it's Stu Cutler.
Chris McDonald.
And Forche. I don't remember his nickname on the show, but yeah, it's a fantastic episode.
I think Stooster's right.
Yeah, it could be. Oh yeah, that was fun. That was a lot of fun. The putting the hot tub in, that was a lot of fun. I'll tell you what was also fun is when you have a show and you're thinking, okay, we have to boost the ratings, so who do we get now to boost the ratings? You know, like Tony Danza, when he was doing his show, had Frank Sinatra on once. And we're sitting around going, the biggest guy that just the hugest star we could get is Bob Vila. A guy that, he isn't that big, but he's big for us. And he came in the summer before the show was on, and he was kind of acting a little imperial, like, well, he kind of claimed, Norm and I sort of do the same kind of comedy stuff on our show, and I'm thinking, really? That's how you look at it. And he was kind of not sure he wanted to do it, but boy, once it took off, Bob Vila couldn't get on this show fast enough. And that ended up being a huge episode. It was just Bob Vila. You didn't have to have Sinatra. You didn't have to, So that's when you really know things are going well.
And now, Adam, you say that I don't like the pilot, but Adam, he's got some problems with Bob Vila that we've documented over the show.
Well, I understand, but I'm just saying that people couldn't wait to see Bob Vila come on the show, and of course, Tim. I mean, the great thing about the Tim character is he could make fun of Al, and it would always be mean, but then he would get his comeuppance somehow. But the audience never stopped liking Tim. I mean, when you start off by saying, and now here's my co-host Al, dinner for one, Borland, a total insult, and the audience would laugh, and then they'd feel bad for Al because he was so good at having that kind of hurt look. Mm-hmm. But to me, Vila didn't bother me because it worked out perfectly that everybody loved him and not Tim. That to me was the enjoyment. Every time you had an opportunity. Like I think once when Brad had a date with someone, and she came in and said, my father loves your show, or father watches your show all the time, and really? And then she says, he really loves Al. Anytime you could insult Tim that way, to me it was fun, and he played it well. But Bob Vila, maybe we went to the well too often, but I think you guys were talking about that one show with the mailbag when he had tried to rig the votes not to have Vila on, and I don't know. I like that, but what was bothering you about those shows?
Now you're on the hot seat.
The high level of comedy that Bob Vila brought to it, or not quite up to our writing standards?
No. I never felt like Vila was able, like, you put Tim Allen and Bob Vila in a scene together, and I think very highly of Tim's acting prowess, and I always thought that Bob Vila came off as sort of wooden in comparison, but I think that's what...
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah, and you have to write jokes for the guy, so...
Right. But,
the only thing that worked about it is that everybody was insulting Tim, so insulting Tim would work, but, sure, Bob Vila's not an actor, yeah. Right. You're right.
Exactly. Can you talk about how your role kind of changed over time? You were very hands-on for the first 50 episodes or so, but then you kind of stepped back as time went on. Can you sort of talk about how that went?
Sure. Our company, I think, was dictated by sort of what Matt's plan was for the company itself. And Matt, I think, really wanted to do film. We did have other TV shows we were doing, but I think his desire, once it was 2 years really cemented, and then we brought in Elliot, who we knew very well from having worked with him on The Cosby Show. We felt the show was in good hands. We were still, involved in the stories, but Elliot was so good at what he did, and when we discussed stuff, and he particularly, I think, helped Pat a lot. Because Pat was looking for, okay, we've done 2 years, I'm the mom, and, and she was always, I'll tell you one thing that Pat was great at was most actresses don't even want to appear to be a mom. They don't want to do laundry. They don't want to be seen doing any domestic chores. She would say things like, I got 3 boys. I should be doing more laundry here, which is true. And so I think Matt was feeling definitely that he wanted to move more toward film, directing, which he finally did. So I think the concept for him always was, the 3 of us will do 2 years, then I will probably do less. We did do some other shows, and frankly, I didn't think we spent enough time doing them as we did on Home Improvement. But so that really became it. And I would still go in and do punch-up 2 nights a week, and keep. I was more hands-on on the show than Matt and David after the first 3 years, and then even less so after that. But I always maintained my hand in the show, maintained a good relationship with the writers, and I was the guy that would come up with things like, of course, we'd never win an Emmy. We might get nominated. So I created our own award show called The Homies, and we had fun with that. One night we had the whole cast in there. Everybody had a couple of drinks, and we would put on our own award show and be up against other people. And in fact, that was around the third or fourth year of the show. We did that. We did that for a couple of years. So I think the show, and I was involved with a softball team, things like that, getting that going. And we had a very good set, and you can't have a good set and a fun set unless your lead actor is a fun person to work with. And he was always great with the crew. We had the same crew for 8 years. Nobody ever left. And that's saying a lot, because on Roseanne, every year they would have a different crew. So one of the producers at the end of the second season on Roseanne said, I am leaving the show. My wife and I are going on vacation to the relatively quiet Beirut. And then Roseanne said, they're not going to think you're funny in Beirut either.
That sounds about right. This interview is kind of fortuitous timing because we just covered the episode Talk to Me, which stars Jim Breuer and Dave Chappelle. And obviously there was a little bit of a spin-off that happened there called Buddies, and you had a big hand in that as well. So we were interested in kind of that process and how that all came to be as well.
Yeah. I have to say, what happened is Disney came to us with Breuer and Chappelle, sort of like they wanted them in a show.
Mm-hmm.
And Matt's first reaction, I think, was, well, he always wanted to do a show where guy's married, but his buddy lives upstairs, so it's a pull between this time with the buddy and the time with his wife. But so that put Chappelle upstairs, unfortunately, when he should have been at the center of it. And I was always famous for coming up with a fix like a year after the show was over. Like the problem, was indeed that Chappelle wasn't at the center. He lived upstairs and kept coming in. So I had said a year later, I said, you know what this show should have been? It should have been Chappelle is living in Chicago, and this white guy from Manitoba or Minnesota moves into Chicago. Chappelle has to have a roommate so he can pay the rent. The white guy moves in. He knows nothing about black culture or the city, and Chappelle is his guide through the city, so that Chappelle has something he's doing. He would get a lot of fun off of the naivete of the guy, because a lot of Chappelle's act dealt with themes like that. So we didn't do that, and the show, I think we kind of were working hard to make something happen. We had good actors. They were funny people. And then, of course, we didn't have Jim Breuer anymore. We had somebody else, and that was because what we were doing wasn't working. And that was a case where it wasn't the actors, it was us. We didn't give them the material they needed to shine. Anyway, Chappelle just torches that show every time he can talk about it, how it was a lousy. And I don't blame him, but it was unfortunate. Had we just had Chappelle, I think we would have come up with a premise like the one I mentioned, but we didn't.
So back to the Home Improvements, do you have kind of a favorite episode of the series or a couple episodes that really stand out to you? Well,
first, of course, I can't not talk about the pilot, obviously, because we spent a year on that and it worked great. I don't know if I have necessarily a favorite. I do think there are moments that I loved, without question. I have to, if I had a list in front of me, I'd go, oh, that was great, and this and that.
Sure.
Do you know, by the way, that they were talking about not doing the pilot first on the air?
What were they going to do instead?
Well, when you said the Michael Landon Award, I thought this must have something to do with me telling a story about Michael Landon, because they had, they got some focus groups. One was of women in suburban Greenwich, and another was in somewhere else, who would really not be your first-line fans of the show. And in the original pilot, we had taken a line that Tim had, which was, women, aren't we just disgusting hairy apes? This and that, and they cheer, and he said, too damn bad we own everything, Well, women in Greenwich and Chicago really responded badly to that. And so ABC said to us, women hate the show. Now, we knew that wasn't true. We were showing the pilot to a lot of women. So they wanted to run the episode where Mark lost the tool. Remember, he was hiding from his father?
Yeah.
They wanted that to be the pilot. We said, you can't do this. So what happened is and they went to a press tour and announced the pilot wouldn't be first. The press just jumped all over them. What do you mean it won't? They wouldn't tell them why. So 3 weeks before we were to air, I think Michael Landon died, and they were going to do a special on the night of Home Improvement's premiere, 3 hours, Michael Landon on NBC. We got a call from ABC that said, well, you might as well show the pilot now because no women are going to be watching you. That's what they said. So we ran the pilot. Of course, we crushed Michael Landon. More women than men were watching the show. And the next couple of days later, we got a letter from a woman in Missouri that said, God, that was funny, with a big exclamation point. And so that's what that's what made the pilot go first.
Wow. Just another happy accident, you know.
Another happy accident. I don't know. I mean, honestly, God, I feel like those first 50 shows, I could go through every one of them and feel like we had a high note in almost all of them. I mean, sure you miss a few, but there's so many great times that Tim and Pat, I mean, just, you know, the show where she wanted her own checkbook and the sort of discussions of that. Sometimes you would, I'm thinking about those first seasons when he blew out the windows in the house, and there's just, or the Santa Claus episode where, and that one got us in a lot of trouble because, remember, along the way, Tim says, well, how do I tell him there's no Santa Claus? And we got calls from parents. You can't have Tim say that. And my kids, you know, every time you think, well, of course we're going to fix that later when they all realize there is a Santa Claus, once you say something, that's it. But that episode when Wilson rolled in as Santa Claus and gave the one brother a rubber band, I think, and the other one a paper clip, I just love stuff like that. And then you sort of see that the real Santa comes overhead. That's just the kind of thing that I found fun with. I mean, those are very small moments. There were so many fun moments with Tim and Pat and Tim and the boys. I mean, the great thing about Home Improvement, it was 3 shows in one. It was a relationship comedy, a man and his wife, which I felt kind of covered ground that husbands and wives cover. It was a show about a family with 3 rambunctious boys and all the stuff that they would come up with. And then it was this insane tool show where a guy could fall 3 stories through a roof and live, you know. It was that kind of, it was slapstick, then there was kind of real relationship, and then there was just a fun boys will be boys kind of atmosphere. When I think back to some of the favorite moments, I'm not even sure if there are moments we did in the first season. I know 2 seasons, I know when he did the barbecue and Jill was trying to set somebody up in the house, and there was a very funny explanation where Tim said, guys don't sit around going, gee, I feel bad for Bob. He's alone. All he does is drink beer and go out with his friends. He really needs somebody in his life, you know. Then there was, I don't know. I think if you name some of those episodes, I could say, yeah, those were great.
Yeah, I mean,
there are moments that I love in every episode where I think just a simple line like the way they were always tormenting the youngest kid. And Tim once said to Brad, the old ones, about how these tortures, the things they come up to hurt make the kid scared or make them swallow a tadpole, whatever. Tim said to Brad, how do you come up with this stuff? And he said, I don't know. They just come to me.
Yeah, there's a lot of lines like that are perfect, and they're delivered really well too, which is important.
Yeah,
the audience responds.
You should know, by the way, that Randy JTT, he was the first person to be cast in the show after Tim. We brought him into the network. There were 15 people there, and we had a fun little sample scene, and he just nailed it. I mean, he was as calm as a cucumber, 10 years old, you know. And
he became a star, you know, as a result.
Sure did. I just watched Lion King last night, and he was in that, so perfect.
Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier that, you know, you and Matt and David, your fathers were all kind of tool men, and we were wondering, are you?
Well, my father was an Italian immigrant, and he worked at a steel mill and did masonry work. Matt's father worked at the Whirlpool plant in Evansville, Indiana, and David's father also worked with his hands. Yeah.
Did that talent kind of bring itself down and end up in your hands as well?
No, I think more so in with David. No. See, I was always rebelling against that. My father, I worked with my father every summer in high school and college, and this was like when we were doing concrete work, outside, blazing sun, breaking concrete, filling it. My father, we'd get out there at 7 in the morning, 20 minutes for lunch, that's it, back we go, till 7 at night. And what saved me is my father was very Italian in that he had a quick temper. It would flare up and then it would go away. So I knew, let's say if we were shoveling dirt into the truck, if I intentionally just threw the dirt past the truck, he would grab the shovel from me, swearing in Italian, and start shoveling it himself. And I would sit back for a couple of minutes, have a cigarette, and then he would subside and we go back to work. So
you get your little break then.
Oh, give us a break, yeah. No, I'm afraid that that did not come back to me, no. I think Matt and David are more tool-oriented than I am.
Yeah, well, that's how we are, so...
Yeah.
Funny thing, by the way, about this is you'd be surprised that so many families have the father or the brother or the son who thinks he knows what he's doing with tools and loves tools, and that had never really been shown. We did have fun with Cliff in Cosby Show, being the guy who wanted to do tool stuff and wasn't very good at it. And but we've never had one that's just solely concentrated on a guy like that.
So we've talked a little bit about the pilot and how you kind of knew at that point that things were going to be big. Kind of shifting a little bit, just in terms of the overall legacy of the show. What are you most proud of about Home Improvement? Or where does the greatest source of pride come from with regards to the show?
Well, I think it's a show that families can watch. I don't think you see much of that anymore. I mean, now all the networks have like their own family channels, and on those channels it's mostly the kids that are the highlights and the parents are in the background. I'm proud of that. I'm proud of. I do not think that Home Improvement will. It has steadily always had an audience. People still talk to me about it who felt it was a great show they could watch with their families. Mm-hmm. We always wanted it to be a show where afterwards a father or son or a family could talk about something that was on the show. I think it was well done, and we did the best we could. I think sometimes the one thing that we never had to worry about is we were never a critically acclaimed show. So we were just doing a show that was popular, people liked. I don't think we sat around thinking of legacy so much as, we did our best. I do feel like when you do a show like Seinfeld, that one of the things that he mentioned at the end was he didn't want to do another season because he was concerned that the critics would not be as favorable as they had been the previous. So we didn't have thoughts like that. We just...
Right. You feel like you're playing more with...
We were very proud of that work that people loved, and we were... it was successful. It was also successful financially, and part of that enabled me to take care of my parents and my wife's parents at the end of their lives in a way that allowed them to stay in their home, have people help them to live dignified lives, and to me that's the most success I feel from the show. I just think the show will always be what it is. I think new generations will enjoy it, that's all I can say for it. When they had the Writers Guild Top 100 shows, I don't even think we were in there. I know Cosby was voted the 50th most. Of course, they might not do that now, but no, we were not. We were just not a critically acclaimed show. And I don't sit around going, what do you mean? Bill Carter of New York Times, the guy that wrote Late Shift, who was he once had us at lunch and said, well, do you think your show is as well written as Seinfeld? Well, you know what he meant. No, it's not. But what we wrote was not, I don't think the Seinfeld people could have ever written. It wasn't that, to write like a wholesome show or a show for a family and have fun with it, it's a certain skill, and I thought we did it pretty well.
Yeah, we always talk about how, all these years later, it doesn't seem like there's the same kind of, it's not syndicated as much and people don't talk about it, or when they do.
No, I agree, but that's my point about comedy changes. I think if you were going to, at the time when Seinfeld and Home Improvement were most important, and you would say which show is going to influence the future more, clearly it has been Seinfeld. Because Seinfeld's show is seen in many other shows, in the kind of show they did, the sort of the dialogue. I mean, nowadays shows are one camera. They're often very clever. People don't write big jokes. They're not sentimental. They're more hard-edged. They're sometimes more mockumentary, like 30 Rock. I would say from that standpoint, and comedy changes. I mean, I don't sit around, remember when All in the Family was on, and those shows, they would have scenes that would last 10 minutes. Well, now shows are much different, and they're not on tape. I would say I am not surprised at this point that the show is not seen as much in syndication.
Yeah, I mean, for us, you talk about how comedy changes. I still think that when we watch it, we often laugh at a lot of the things, and some of the things are still funny to us. So that's, at least for me, I'm surprised that it's not as popular. I mean, I still think it's a good show. So, and worth watching.
Well, a lot of that may depend on Disney. They're doing so well with so much that maybe they're not concentrating as much on Home Improvement. Plus, we've been a pain in their butt legally, so.
So there you go. There you go.
Yeah. You could be. There are sanctions on us, I think. Now, look, anybody wants to make money from anything they can, but they're doing. They're going to do a whole streaming thing now. They've got so much going on. They talked about a reboot for Home Improvement.
Right.
Oh yeah.
In fact, Tim talked to him, Iger, and Iger said, "Yeah, hey, let's just put that on the 2019 schedule." And he said, "Well, aren't you having some problem with Windhouse?" I said, "Well, not that I know." He's so big, he doesn't even know that there's any kind of legal action going on. Then the next day, he called Tim back and said, let's forget about that. So, but as it turned out,
we wrote a reboot script for just leisurely, just to share with our fans. So, we could send.
You did a reboot.
I drafted a reboot script.
Well, did you do it on the air?
We did it like a couple of scenes, but it's a TV.
Oh, well, no, wait. What number show is that?
It takes place. Jordan, when did we do that?
I'd love to hear it.
Long ago, but yeah, we can send that to you for sure.
Okay. So how did you envision the show would be 20 years later? Of course, if you tell me that, then and we reboot it and use it, you'll sue me. But
Well, hey, that's case scenario.
Well, how did you take care of Wilson?
What brings them back to Detroit is Wilson's funeral, and everybody kind of meets up and rallies around that. It's sort of like a big chill kind of scenario, almost.
Oh, I see.
That's kind of the inciting sort of.
But in doing that, you still have to have storylines for these characters 20 years later, right?
Yeah. In that scenario, also, Al owns a hardware store, and Tim is broached by some millennial type to do a YouTube web kind of show, sort of similar to the Last Man Standing.
Exactly. Yeah, they did find a way for him to do his. Yeah. Well, that's good. Were there jokes in there? Okay.
Oh, there's jokes. When we reenact it, it's him and I doing all the voices, so it's not the greatest. But
I understand. I can follow along. Okay. Well, that's good. That's good. Well, I mean, Matt and David and I were ready to come back and do the reboot. This wasn't going to just be handed off to somebody else. Matt was quite sincere about coming back and getting the show right, and and we were sort of initially having a few quick discussions about it before. So the thing about Tim is his other show got picked up. I can understand why it. See, he's doing that show for 20th Century Fox. And 20th Century Fox makes money on syndication, so if they can get another season on, they're going to do it by putting it on their own network. When you do a show and sell it into syndication, very often the person who buys it has to buy every episode. That's how they get it. So the more episodes you do, the more they have to buy it at the price they said they would pay. So I'm sure that's what Fox is thinking. And also, the show, most of those characters are about the same age as they were, so he can move right in and pick up where they left off. He's not reimagining a show 20 years later, which, by the way, I thought Roseanne's people did brilliantly. I thought that was a tremendous reboot.
Yeah, and
while it lasted.
Yeah, I was going to say it didn't last very long, but they've got.
No, Roseanne made sure of that.
So, yeah.
Now they're going to do the Connors.
Right.
You heard that, right?
They're going to keep capitalizing as much as they can, right?
Well, they're in. I think they're going to go into production. It's going to be everybody but Roseanne. In fact, Disney kind of said that they didn't want Roseanne to make a penny out of this, or else they wouldn't do the I mean, it's sort of like amazing. You know, they're really out to get her.
I'll watch John Goodman do anything. Really.
Oh yeah, he's tremendous. Well, again, let me say about Matt. Matt cast that show. Matt's found John Goodman. Now, Matt's found those other actors. And those other actors, 20 years later, have come back and been great. They have grown. They've been good. They're still good actors. So Matt, honestly, deserves a lot of credit for why Roseanne works.
Oh, the last question that we have is we're going to take a step back from Home Improvement, and we want to talk about another movie that Adam and I both like that you had a hand in, starring Mel Gibson, What Women Want.
Right.
And we were just wondering if you could talk a little bit about that process.
While to be honest, most of the credit for that has to go to Nancy Myers, who wrote and directed the movie. Mm-hmm. We had the script. We found the script. We were working on the script, and Nancy came in and said, "Here's what I see." She wrote it, and she got Mel Gibson in. Gibson read it and agreed to do it. And once he agreed to do it, this was 2002 when he was really big, everybody jumped in. Helen Hunt, Alan Alda, you name it, Bette Midler. Took a day for them to jump into the show. And so I can't really take too much credit for that. I think the movie that I was more hands-on was the one Matt directed called Where the Heart Is with Ashley Judd and Natalie Portman. So I can't really take too much credit for this. This is really one that we executive produced, and that just means we got the script, we got it we got sold it, we had Nancy connected to it, and so I'm sorry to disappoint you on that one.
Oh well, there
are so many disappointments you have with me, so that's okay. That's just
that's life, right? Yeah,
it's life.
That's all. We don't have any additional questions. Is there anything else you want to put out in the ether or anything?
I will tell you what I think is my favorite line ever on the show.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm not sure if that was in the first 2 years or afterwards, when he was supposed to take the little boy to I think that was the first 2 years, right? When he was going to take him to the ballet, but instead he took him to a Pistons game. Mm-hmm. And he came back with the program, and he was reading out of it. So when she asked about it, he would read these comments out of the book, which clearly you could see. So when she grabbed the book from him and said, "Oh, yeah? How does it end? How does the ballet end?" He said, "Well, it ends like every ballet ends. The audience wakes up and stumbles out to their cars." Just love that. I didn't write it, but I love that line.
We haven't.
I don't know what else to tell you about the ether. I'm love that you guys do this. I love that you're critical of it, sometimes insulting the show, which is hilarious to me. I mean, I am not thin-skinned. I think it was Gloria Swanson, the silent film star, who once said, "I don't care what you write about me as long as you spell my name right."
Well, I think that's one reason that we really liked the show is because we had, we liked it and we didn't like it at different points, and that makes it more interesting.
No, that's great. And I know Adam is married, so he relates it from that front, and Jordan is not. And when we were writing the show, it was always about episodes in our lives. Oh, I know. I'm sorry. I was going to tell you that two of the major influences on the show. At the time the show came on, there was a big male movement going on in the 90s, sort of in response to the women's movement. And Robert Bly wrote a book called Iron John, and that was that whole thing of men mentoring their men. And he wasn't wrong that boys need to be mentored by men. I mean, so many times in society, problems with young boys happen because there are not fathers there, not men that they can model themselves after, good men. And that guy also included that wild stuff about going out in the woods and banging drums, which became sort of the cliche of it. And the other book that influenced it a lot was Deborah Tannen's You Just Don't Understand, which was the way men and women communicate. And an example of what she talked about is that in a car once, a woman put on a Billy Joel song that totally summed up how she was feeling at the moment about their relationship. And she said, and what did the guy think? Hey, Billy Joel. You know, nothing. What Sam used to say in his act, he said, women, do you want to know what men are thinking? Nothing, you know. And one of our premises of the show was men and women should not live together. And the reason they do is they overcome the many difficulties in communication and to make it work. And so that kind of is what we were thinking, too. So,
fantastic. Carmen, we so appreciate your time and your openness, and even going back and listening to some of our shoddy episodes.
Well, may I just say that you guys have a very funny thing going. Like I said, one's single, one's married. One guy gets a little more of what's happening sometimes than the other, and vice versa. So it is fun. So
we very much.
Hey, coming from you, that's high praise.
Yeah, well, thank you for that.
This is our 100th episode.
Thank you for that fake compliment, but I'll take it anyway.
Yeah, it's an honor to have you here for our 100th, and maybe in 100 more you'll come back, and that would be.
Well, maybe if you guys in the future, in the future do a retrospective of Buddies or Thunder Alley, I'll be happy to join in.
Okay.
Oh,
great.
I'm not sure I see that happening, but Buddies is the show Chappelle did.
Right.
Yeah.
You know right away you're in trouble when you have a show called Buddies. You have missed the mark somehow.
Yeah.
One last thing I can tell you, by the way, before you hang up. The reason the show is called Home Improvement is Matt did not want to name it The Tim Allen Show, because he named the show for Roseanne, and she was awful, so he did not want to do another show with an actor and name it for that actor. And Home Improvement was a name that Billy Reback came up with. Like, it seemed to work, Home improvement, you're improving the home, you're trying to improve your relationship. But like you said, every time you try to look up home improvement, it's all these shows that deal with, remodeling homes. So that's the bad thing about it.
That is tough.
I mean, when you say home improvement, if I say I worked on home improvement, half the people think I'm talking about a fix it up show.
Yeah, that's what we get. People always look at us very weird because they know we don't actually have any of those skills, so they're very confused that we would do a podcast.
Yeah, when they listen, right? Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, good luck with the rest of it.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks so much.
Take care. You're welcome. Bye-bye.
All right, that is it for our interview with Carmen Finestra. Thank you for joining us for this special episode. Thank you for joining us for the 100th episode extravaganza. We hope you have enjoyed the show so far, and will continue to stick with us as we finish the home improvement run. Next episode, we have something a little bit different. We're going to be running different behind-the-scenes outtakes that we have accumulated over our 100 episodes so far. So after that, we will get back into Season 5 and the regular home improvement episodes, but hope you enjoy the outtake episode as well. So take care, everybody.